say bonjour. My name's Don Morrison, as mentioned. My Anishinaabe name is Natawacheweb. Lynx Clan, Buffalo Point First Nation, which is on the far west side of Treaty 3 territory. It's actually into Manitoba. So that's my territory. Born and raised in Kenora. Just a real honor to be here. I do want to acknowledge our elder for the prayers. If there was more than one elder, I acknowledge all of you, of course. The participants, which I understand we have ranging from chiefs, councillors, administrators, you name it. We've got a great cross-section of individuals who are responsible for the governance functions of our individual communities. Just give you a little bit more background about myself. Again, I was very young when I started at Bill. I actually had a summer job here at Matawa First Tribal Council when I first graduated from university in 1990. So I did have the privilege of flying to some of the northern communities in north of Thunder Bay. Went to Kenora spring in 1990. Thought it would just be a pit stop, but I ended up being there for 29 years. So through that, I did gain the experience of working with our financial administrators, our band administrators, frontline day-to-day challenges and successes. Was also worked for several years at BMOC as a resource development advisor, and that involved negotiating impact benefit agreements with mining companies, exploration permits, things like that. So I have that experience. And then my last 5 years at BMOC were as executive director. So again, having that experience in addressing human resource issues, communication issues, financial issues. So I do have all those experience in that. So when I was listening this today at some of the challenges our communities are facing, most of the things were like, I've been there. I know what it feels like to have to address some of those challenges at the frontline level when working for First Nation communities. Okay, some of the additional, in addition to being on the Ontario First Nations Limited Partnership Board and the Sovereign Wealth Fund Board, the discussion this morning talking about fiduciary responsibility, governance, things like that, decision making, that was very crystal clear to me in terms of the challenges. See, where we're fortunate on those boards is, when you talk about conflict, for example, the boards I'm on, that's one of the first things on the agenda is, do you have a conflict to declare? And as board members, we have to answer yes or no. And if it's no, or if it's yes, then we have to take the appropriate steps. But that, to me, that's all key on having very professional minute takers, note takers, sending agendas out on time, things like that. And I do know just from my experience where I work at Shoal Lake 40, that's not always the case. It's not always that easy. Chief and council have to sit down and make decisions. Sometimes there isn't a formal agenda. Sometimes things get added to agenda, taken off the agenda, things like that. So it's in my mind, it sort of got me thinking: how do we get to the place where I see which is more or less a corporate governance model, to get to a First Nation decision-making model. Let's call it that. I'm still trying to work that out in my head, the best way to go about it, because a lot of the work we do at Shoal Lake decision-making is informal. Certainly informal. I walk into meetings. There's no written agenda. There's no declaration of conflicts or anything like that. We just proceed with the agenda, and it's worked so far. But it's almost one of those situations where it'll work until it doesn't. So that's something that I have in mind with my work that I'm doing. Some of the other, a couple of other major projects I've had the privilege of working on is. For First Nations, Shoal Lake being one of them, are the owners of the Niwa and Wendanomak, which is our Four Winds group, and that's the highway twinning from Kenora to the Manitoba border. Embedded in there is, of course, the work, the equipment, but also significant training opportunities. The other piece is guardians of the land. We have our young people going out on the land and ensuring that the work that's being done follows our Anishinaabe principles, but also Western science. So that's another major initiative. One that I was really fortunate to work on as well too was working with Wabsimook First Nations. And I was brought in to assist them with their child care law for those who are working in that field, Bill C-92. An amazing experience. They were the second in Canada to actually implement their law. Their unit that oversees all of that amazing work and sacred work, really, we're talking about children, went from 40 to over 150 staff. Keeping in mind that's for a community, an on-reserve population of 1,000. So you can sort of think in the back of your mind, like, how big is your community? You almost have to multiply it by that to get to where it's at. Assisted them negotiate it, but also now we're at the equally tough part, well, maybe the more tough part of actual implementation. Speaking as a group here, when it comes to planning, and that's why when you're doing your work, or if somebody presents a work plan to you or a proposal, the first thing that always goes through my mind: how do we actually implement this? What's the day one step? Do we have the staff? Do we have the professionals? Do we have the resources? So that's always in the back of my mind too, is the planning piece. Some of my other experience that maybe relates a little bit more to what we're discussing here today is, and it just happened to be Shoal Lake 40. We did, and that was actually part of the presentation that was done last year, is taking Shoal Lake 40 from a place where they're under third-party management to where there is no external management for Shoal Lake 40. It happened quickly. We're talking within a couple of years. They went from third-party management to co-management to self-management. I don't have my slide deck, but I would show you how rapid it happened. I can tell you from that experience, and I was working at the Tribal Council at the time, it took commitment from leadership, it took commitment from staff and the community itself to fix that. If anybody asks me what were the big steps, that was it. They had community meetings, they brought everybody together. I'm not sure how the communities here are, but initially they did have a fractured community along traditional and Christian lines. That was the truth. That was the truth that they had to face at the day. But they did bring the groups together, and now they're working together. Is it perfect? No, but it is moving forward. The other piece I also want to mention too is the work that Shoal Lake has done in the past in terms of their community engagement model, let's call it. And it's on the website, Shoal Lake website, where they actually have their community broken down into 4 circles, which are men, women, elders, and youth, and they're appointed by the committee. So there's 4 circles. And that feeds into the governance model in terms of decision making for chief and council. So that's how they get input. The other piece, and I was talking at dinner a bit about it last night, compared to where we were 30 years ago as First Nations, now more and more the services that we provide are for off-reserve members. I remember back in the day it was just post-secondary, now it's post-secondary, now it's Jordan's Principle, now it's prevention services. So it is getting to a place where that off-reserve input into the decision-making is critical. What Shoal Lake has done, I'm just going back to their child care law initiative. We are in the process of doing our researching, but we have individuals that go Thunder Bay, Kenora, Shoal Lake, Winnipeg several times a year to gather input from each of the major areas where the population is there. So that's just one way that we've ensured community input, accountability, things like that. Okay, yeah, that's pretty well all for my introduction. Did just want to reference with Shoal Lake 40, once things get moving, it becomes a very fast-moving train in terms of moving forward with things. Shoal Lake themselves right now, we are building a new prevention building. We're waiting for final approval on Jordan's Principle building. Water line extensions, we're just finishing a 15-unit housing project, which I will also say is being done by our own Economic Development Corporation. So we're managing that. We're looking at off-reserve housing in both Winnipeg and Kenora. So there's a lot that's going on in terms of long-term planning. But when I look at, and this all comes from community vision, right? The key though to me, and again, not perfect, but the governance itself, and when I say governance, I mean our management, our human resources, our finance, our IT, our leadership. That all has to be really super strong to be able to advance at the pace that we need to, and take advantage of the opportunities that are there right now. like I say, not perfect, always making decisions in real time, but so far it's working for us. So that's a little bit, that's a lot about my background. I think I'll ask the other panel members to take a seat, if you will. We have, oh, you got Priscilla just to introduce herself first too. That's another way to do it. Yeah, you can.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Priscilla Graham. I am the band administrator for Nipigo-Sagagin. I started out way back as a summer student for the community. That's one of the biggest successes that we claim with our community, is that a number of our youth that started out as summer students now are full-time employees and managers at the band office. So that's always one of the biggest successes that we allude to when we talk about our community. I've been, let's see, I started working in medical services. I've been in education. I did a stint on council. So I've seen, I guess, governance from all sides. And I've got to take that experience and bring it forward to now. What I try to do is pass on what I've learned to my new council that comes in, every new one, as well as to come to events like these and share the good and the bad, because it's not, it'd be so nice if it was smooth sailing and we could come to a conference like this and take home everything that we learned, but I think the best part from any of these conferences is the networking and the information that we share, what worked, what didn't, and what to try next. So I think that's one of the best things that I've taken out of any of these conferences. This one in particular, I've been to so many governance conferences over the years, and I don't think I've ever seen a group with so many leadership, which is, it's fantastic. Because normally it's the technicians like myself who are you know, sitting policy makers that are attending these things, but we don't have the leadership who are the policy approvers. And we need both parties to be sitting here together learning the same things in order to move our communities forward. So I wanted to just quickly take 5 minutes of your time. And this is, it is part of the question and answer period. And it was from yesterday. We had a lot of talk about how do chief and council know what their jobs are, what their roles and responsibilities are, and how do we teach them? And everybody who got up and said, we do orientation, and which is fantastic. But then after, I had a few communities who had come to me and said, okay, everybody's doing orientation. How do we do that? So I thought, I just so happen to have with me the orientation manual type presentation that I do with my community. So I said, well, if I could, I would quickly share it with you so you could at least get an idea of where to start, because that's the scariest thing, is where do I start? I know I need to transfer all this information to the new council, but where do I start? So I did load up the presentation, and I'm gonna just flick through it real quick. So basically, our rules is this has to be presented to our chiefs and councils as soon as they get in. And everybody is so passionate when they get on council and they want to hit the ground running. And unfortunately, how can they if they don't know the ins and outs of the community, and they don't know maybe even the ins and outs of the rules of other organizations. And we work with so many that they need to get at least a basic education. So we do this immediately. First things first, to govern, they need to understand governance. So I'll do a quick what is governance with them, and I would build in another presentation to this, but basically it's how you run things. And we talk about governance structures, and we talk about the tools. What are the tools? Things like that. First thing I learned was you got to take them away somewhere where you're not going to have interruptions or distractions. So you can't do it at the band office because everybody's going to be coming in and out wanting to talk to them. So you have to take them away somewhere to do this. Second thing I learned, which we didn't do, but lesson learned, we're doing it next time, take their phones away. Because they, as great of a tool as a phone is, it's a distraction when you're trying to sit and go through stuff that's as heavy as this. So yeah, next time we're walking around with a basket and everybody's got to deposit their phones, and then you get to pay attention to the business at hand. So I'd go through this, and then we talk about our community. These are our key groups. The way we look at our community is we have membership, leadership, and administration. In those, of course, there are subgroups, like you've got management, chiefs, counselors, advisors, program workers, and on the membership piece, you've got children, youth, young adults, adults. So all of those are just subgroups, but your three main groups are those. In our community, these are our roles. So our membership provides input to our leadership. Leadership provides direction to our administration. Administration provides services to our membership. So that's the way we look at things, and everything goes in a circle so that we can keep moving. We talk about mainstream, the difference between mainstream organizations and First Nations, because they are not the same at all. So I just show them a quick model of this is how a chain of command might look. In our case, this is how ours looks, because we've got all of us in the middle, that's our First Nation, but on the outside of us, we've got our funders, and they also have a role to play with us. We will go through our organizational chart and make sure they know who's where and who reports to who. We go through our governance structure and what our end goal is, and it's community wellness. We want to have a well community. We talk about the tools, just brief descriptions of them. We go into our governance tools. We've got policies for a lot of these things. Everything right down to committees. Most people who get elected may not have even ever sat on committees or boards or had any of that experience. And the reason we delved more deeply into an orientation manual was when we were doing our comprehensive community planning. One of the questions that came up was there's no qualifications to be on chief and council. So how are we going to make sure that our chief and council are representing us properly? So that's why we started to develop a better orientation manual and plan. Again, we just went into this. These are the things that we have. All of our policies, things like that. We've got all of that, but also at the bottom we put this is what we need and whatever else they can think of. So we'll go through all of these, and if there's things that they see lacking, then now's the time, and we'll follow the process, strike up a committee, whatever it might be, to create them. We talk about committees because we all have a lot of committees, the difference between standing, ad hoc. We have a structure for our committees, so we go through that with them. What else do we have? We've got, this is what we're looking for, is active leadership, capable management, dedicated staff, and engaged membership. Ideally, if we could have those, then we're hitting the ground running. And we've got chief and council. This is them as a whole. So they're just a brief description. They're the decision makers. They've got quorum. We talk about that, the rules on it. They hold, formal meetings. They give reports on portfolios. So I just kind of run through each of the things that they're responsible for, and then I'll go into the chief's responsibilities. Our case, the chief is the face and the voice of AZA. So they're the one that's out there in the public speaking on behalf. And then we run through another list. And on the bottom, probably one of the most important things is read everything you get sent. So they need to stay informed, and that's one of their main responsibilities. And then counselors. Counselors have a lot of the same responsibilities, but they are separate and distinct people. Then we go through our management, so all of our projects and programs. I would bring in my department managers to also do presentations on each of theirs individually, so that we delve deeper into our projects and services, because our counselors need that in order to go out and advocate for us on their portfolios. Whatever annual events we have, to make sure they know, because like I said, sometimes a person gets elected on council and they've never even been to a band meeting. And we basically need to educate them and give them a rounded education on the community. Then we go into, like, their next biggest thing is actual financial management. It's their responsibility, what they need to know. We have an FAL, so I'll go through the history of it with them. We'll actually go through the document itself, and we go through all the policies underneath it. Finances and accounting, they're responsible to make sure that that's all done. We have staff that do the physical work, but it is actually Chief and Council's responsibility to ensure that the money is properly managed. So Council needs to understand it's their fiduciary duty to make sure that everything is being done above board for the benefit of everyone. Again, agreements, I would bring in our most recent ISC agreement, and I would go through it with them and show them how to read it, things like that. Any of our other funders, same deal. Budgeting, we do the overview, but then I would also bring in the most recent budget to them, which usually it's already passed by the previous council. And I would go through all of that with them and explain the importance and yada yada. And then any of our HR-related financial responsibilities that they might have, I would go through all of that with them. Insurance, we have to have insurance on everything. So all of this, banking, investments, these are things that it's quite easy for a chief and council to say, I trust my finance manager to do it. But legally, they need to be aware and they need to understand what their finance manager is doing. So you could trust your staff to do the work and to make sure it's right, but you should at least have the basic understanding so that you could catch if something wasn't right. So we try to make sure that we go through all of this stuff with each and every council that comes in, and then basically we just give them the basis of fiduciary duty is make your decisions based on what's best for AZA as a whole. Rely on the facts, your advisors, so your staff and your managers, your lawyers, and use your best judgment. And then, so inside, there's probably 20 other presentations that happen inside this, but that's the basis of how we do our orientation, and it could take anywhere from a week to 3 months. So if we need a little bit more support for our chief and council to understand, then we would do that, and we would set up more meetings with management, staff, and da-da-da. But anyways, that was just stemming from some of the questions that we had yesterday on, it's easy to say we do orientation, but how do you actually do it? So this is how AZA does it. And it's a work in progress. Every council, we need to tweak it sometimes for them. And all of our programs and projects and services change every year or a couple of years. So this document is living and breathing, and it just keeps on getting built up on each time. So I just wanted to share that with you, so then hopefully that helps you to get yours going if you're going to go that way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And for myself personally, I almost want a copy of that, if you don't mind, that or something like it. That's good work.
I would say now you're all qualified to be chief and council of AZA. So there you go, 5-minute tutorial.
It's so well organized. I've been fortunate out at Shoal Lake, for example. Our last council, we only had one change. So, but to be honest with you, we don't have a formal orientation process like this, and it would be very helpful. I know that. So I view that as a best practice for sure. Okay, I don't know how you want to proceed. Do the rest of the panelists, I believe, have presented already before? Yeah. And so I don't know if you want to do any type of introductions, or we can get right into the questions. Just so you're aware, we have total of 13 questions we're going to look at. However, I shouldn't have said that. 2 of them, I believe, were answered just before lunch already. So we'll look at the 11 questions for sure. And I'm also, some of them are tough, challenging questions. I'm not the type of person to sugarcoat stuff, so I'm just going to say what it says. Okay?
I was just going to point out, I always tell my new councils, you know, the way people perceive things is important. So I'm sitting far away from everybody, and it's not that I would snuggle right up to Audrey, but I'm coming down with something. So I'm kind of sitting with my back turned to them, which always, for someone watching, seems like, wow, that's really bad body language, but that's all that's happening. I don't have anything against them.
You know what? Based on that, I was going to come and join you guys over there, but now I'll just stay over here. Okay. In any case, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to approach these questions, and this is, I'll try not to put anybody on our panel in a spot, but I went through the questions, and I'm sort of identifying who might be the best people from our panel to answer them. One thing I do want to mention though is. Priscilla had a great idea, and that was that, you know, we ensure that we get input from, because she, of course, works frontline in her community, which I believe she said was about 700 people. 500? Yeah. We have the chief. I'm not even sure how big Fort William is. It's pretty big, though. Approximately 2,500, and then we have Shoal Lake, where I work at, where we have 300 in the community and probably 700 in total. So hopefully, like with some of these questions, we can get some different perspectives from the First Nation representatives who have that direct experience working with communities. Again, as I had mentioned earlier, for example, that the board work I do, there's a formal way of making decisions and setting up meetings, and that's not always possible in smaller communities, just simply because we don't have the people who can fulfill those roles. So that's just some of the perspective there. So what I'll do is I'll get right into the questions here, and I tried to organize them a bit, but they're very diverse questions and very good questions. So the first one I'm going to task Audrey and perhaps Chief Solomon to answer. In your opinion, what are the core values of governance, and how would you practice them?
Okay, so for myself, I would say that honesty, accountability, and transparency would be the best core values, or the most important core values to me. And how I would practice that is by ensuring that I share all information that is important for council, administration, and the membership as well. You know, and sometimes you're dealing with information, and it can be difficult to, I guess, for everybody to understand, or even sometimes to understand yourself. So, you know, so taking the time to make sure that there's a level of understanding of the information that you're trying to convey. Being approachable, like, so in terms of transparency and accountability, being approachable for people to come and ask you questions, and answering those things in the best way you can, while of course maintaining appropriate confidentiality of some things that might be human resources related, or confidential to a specific member. Thank you.
What she said, no. It's true though. everything that Chief Solomon mentioned, I think, are really important. But, you know, we've also, with a lot of the work at the community level now, I've been striving to bring in some of the traditional teachings into it. For example, using community values, like, you know, we talk about the 7 grandfather teachings, but really drilling down to articulate what do those words actually mean, like when we're talking about the way we do business. So values, even being, where does being inclusive? How do you demonstrate fairness and equity? Counselors and chiefs are approached with every possible situation that an individual or even as a community as a whole are dealing with. So how do you manage those expectations as well, while making sure that you're accountable, transparent, and so on? So it's a big question, but I think every community has to strive as a council as well to figure out how do they demonstrate that. The words are important, definitely, but words matter. But the words also translate to action or need to be articulated in some way.
Miigwech, Brad, Priscilla, do you have anything to add to that, or we can proceed to further questions?
I just think that with most of our communities, we need to look back and make sure we incorporate our customs into our new governance practices, because we're walking on both sides of the line all the time. So we're walking on the one side where we do have our community has its own customs and historical practices, but we also are living in the business world as well. So we need to make sure that we've got formalized rules too. So it's, I guess, balancing both sides of that line. That's important for the council to portray when they're out there.
I'll just add a short comment, kind of tie into the conference and my own presentation, Your Honor, is that inform yourselves and make yourself knowledgeable in terms of what your roles are as either chief or a member of council. You know, especially if you're new to that elected position. My experience, you know, with elected officials, whether or not it's chief and council or even sitting on a board, a lot of people have their own conceptions or perceptions of what their role is, and sometimes those perceptions aren't 100% accurate. So sometimes just, you know, and that's what I like about the orientation presentation we saw a few minutes ago, that's fantastic, because it gives everybody a baseline understanding of what their roles are, you know, and they can build off that, because again, if there's experienced members on council already and somebody else is the new inexperienced person, that's one of the benefits of being on council. You can learn from the people that are there and know the nuances, and I certainly know that you can talk about the rules, but the thing is that you need to see them in practice. You have to experience what they actually mean, you know. So again, just make sure you're informed and you gain that knowledge and put that knowledge into practice as quickly as possible.
Okay, Miigwech, one thing I want to share on that, and I'll try to keep my own storytelling to a minimum, but this is a story. You know, back, like I mentioned, I'm on Ontario First Nations Limited Partnership Board, and I remember giving a community meeting, Nisatchewan First Nation, just north of Kenora, and because it's all money, just talking about money, gaming dollars, I actually did have an elder get up and correctly point out and basically said, Don, what the heck is wrong with you? All you talk about is money. And why it was a good lesson for me is part of, I think when you talk about core values, for me anyway, is always to remember why you're there, and especially me, like to keep myself grounded. I'm there for the future generations, for community development, to ensure that resources get to where they're needed the most, be it an elders program, a Jordan's Principle program, a school, what have you. That's really what it is. It's less about dollar signs and it's more about why are you doing what you're doing. So every now and then I do have to remind myself, and every now and then I do remind our management teams that you know, if there's staffing issues or conflicts, is say, hey, why are we here? So that's great answers. Thank you very much. Got the next one. This one I'll tell a short story on this one too, and it's a funny thing. The question is, and then I'm going to ask Priscilla to comment because her and I had a bit of a talk about it. Finance is an integral part of most First Nations. should there be a support position or a leadership position? And my short story on that one is, a couple of years ago, I got an email addressed to Chief Don Morrison, and I milked that one quite a bit around the band office quite a bit. Yeah, you're talking to Chief Morrison, not. And of course, our actual chief is Chief Reds guy, so we got quite a bit of humor of that. My own role, I am if I had to label myself, it would be more of maybe a senior advisor to Chief and Council. Definitely not a leadership position. As anybody who's worked with First Nations know, like, even though I'm the Director of Finance, I do a lot more than that. So it is very much senior advisor. In terms of a leadership position, no, I don't see it that way. But Priscilla, do you have anything to add?
No, that's I guess how we look at it as well. We identify ourselves as the advisors for Chief and Council. We talk about our council taking on portfolios. Usually one of them is finance. And a lot of times you may get a council that doesn't necessarily have a lot of background in finance. So in situations like that, we're not expecting that person who has a portfolio is going to be leading the way in finance. But we're expecting that maybe they need to work a little bit more closely, get a better understanding, so that when the talk boils down to finance, they've educated themselves along with the help of your advisor, so your financial controller, director, what have you, because absolutely at the end of the day, that's one of the main responsibilities of Chief and Council, is to ensure that the money's still going to be there and still going to be coming in for those future generations. And I remember, and I still, we had one council member, and every time I would start talking, she'd look at me and say, budget, budget, budget. And she would laugh, but then after she started to understand, and we went through the agreements and where the money comes from, and explained the rules on how we have to spend it according to the funders, and da-da-da-da. And she had a much higher appreciation of budgets because usually if council's gonna make a decision on any money, the first thing that your advisors are gonna say is, what's in the budget? Can the budget handle it? So I think there absolutely is a position, not necessarily on council, but someone on council needs to make the effort to get themselves better educated with finance. And you can do that. Best people are your frontline finance workers. They know more than any of us managers and directors.
Okay, which, does any of the other panelists have any comments on that question?
I just want to make one comment on yeah, definitely finance has a really important role. But a council, we've heard from Brad, we've heard from Chief Michelle talking about the community. Where does the community want to go? What's the vision? And working with your finance people in terms of how to resource, that's the relationship. How much money do we have? How much money do we need? Where do we need to, find more resourcing, more people, and so on? So it is definitely a working relationship and an interdependent relationship. You can go until there's no dough, like we were talking about yesterday, but the reality is you never have enough. So how do we utilize the money, the funds we do have, to meet the objectives that we want to accomplish?
I guess the only thing that I would add is I believe that financial literacy is important for everybody at the council table. And, I think that we can have a minimum level of understanding even if we're non-finance people. And so when we talk about orientation, while I can't say that at Fort William First Nation we do have financial literacy training, it's certainly something that I think is a responsible thing for us to do, is undertake to have that type of training. And of course, certainly the fiduciary training that would go along with that as well. So if that can be offered to all of council, I think that would be great.
just a very brief comment. Get the right people in the right spots and respect their skills and their knowledge.
Okay, thank you. As everybody was speaking, I'm not asking for an answer to this, but I was just thinking in terms of my own, and I'm thinking of my own position. Chief and council rely on me to provide financial advice. Where is that fiduciary responsibility for senior managers when they're giving that type of advice? That because it's a regular basis. I'm not sure how many of you experience that in your day-to-day work. My phone probably has emails on it right now from chief and council. What do you think, Don? Do we have it in the budget? What's the plan on this? So that's sort of in the back of my mind too, is like, yes, there is that fiduciary of chief and council, but I also think there is a responsibility for senior managers and advisors to do their best to know what's out there as well too. So that was kind of what was going through the back of my mind when I was hearing this. Okay, I don't know who wants to, and I think this has probably been talked to, even though I've only been here today, but maybe yesterday. How do you ensure a clear separation between chief and council and day-to-day administration? I just wrote a note here. I was thinking, Chief Solomon, if you want to start that off, because you are a chief and you would be in a great position to sort of give that ground level perspective.
He decided he was going to ask me all the hardest questions, and I don't know how I got the short stick, but I did. I'm just kidding. You know, this is something that we are definitely evolving at Fort William First Nation, and I think that as you grow as a First Nation, as your First Nation becomes bigger, if as you become more involved with economic development opportunities, you start to evolve in terms of your governance structure or how you undertake governance. And so this is definitely something that we have been working on internally with our council, is developing our internal wampum, if you will, in terms of, whose lane is administration, whose lane is council, and having those very clear distinctions is definitely, something that we're working on, and really trying to strengthen our own governance and look at ways that we can be more efficient and have good relations with our administration. And I think that, having those very clear lines of where one person's responsibility ends and the next person's or body's responsibility ends and the other one starts, it's really important to also convey that to community, because I'm sure anybody in this room knows that there's this propensity to for our members to automatically come to council or to automatically come to the chief for the answers to questions, and it's so important that we be deferring back to our administration, because they are the people that we entrust to administer the programs and services that we offer to membership. So it's vitally important, and it's a worthwhile exercise to make sure that everybody understands what those roles are. So we've seen the presentation on council orientation. Well, perhaps that needs to be extended to community as well. So community has a good understanding of who they're supposed to direct their questions and inquiries to within the administration, and then at what point does this get elevated to council? And so that everybody has an understanding, and not just within the administration and the council. Thanks.
I'd just like to add, I think information is so important, education, understanding. One of the things we're working on is modernizing the First Nation Governance Handbook right now. And part of this, we think that there's one really key piece that's missing, and we're going to be working on a presentation to be available to First Nations who are getting close to an election, and the title is, "So You Want to Run for Council," right? People are not aware of what being on council is all about. It's very complicated. There's a lot of complexity. The conflict of interest alone can be a university education, really, because there's many dimensions to it. But the other part to that is people campaign. I've been around for a long time, and I've been privy to being just listening. I'm an electoral officer, so I hear certain things at elections, but campaigning to, when I get in, I'm going to get rid of this person. That's actually things that happen. And it creates it starts a very animos, a very negative environment. So I think really promoting the education piece, and as Priscilla was talking about the orientation is definitely really important to understand what is this landscape. Every community is different. Your policies, while there may be some a thread of HR, finance, and so on, but every community has its own procedures as to how that happens. So just being on the same page is going to go a long way to mitigating that conflict.
I think I've heard the term, because I'm a huge advocate of keeping business separated from politics, and I've heard it said we shouldn't be separating. We're supposed to all be on the same team, and we are on the same team. We're just playing different positions. So, maybe administration is defense and maybe leadership is offense, whatever analogy you want to use. But that's what it is. You're not separating within the community to say it. You're separating the roles, the responsibility. There are, whether we like it or not, different rules for chief and council than there are for administrative staff. We all fall under the Canada Labour Code, whereas chief and council don't necessarily. Our communities have to actually create our own codes and laws to help our leaders govern themselves and discipline themselves, I guess. So I think that it's not, I know that the easiest term to understand is separation, but I mean it's not. We need to find, I guess, maybe a better term for saying that, because it needs to happen. Chief touched on efficiency. If we had every last decision and every last approval going to chief and council, none of our projects, programs, and services would be able to continue, and it would be our communities that were losing out on the services and how long it would take for them to get approvals on things. So that's why we have frontline workers, and we have program managers and project managers and directors. They are there to follow the policies that have been approved already by chief and council. So chief and council are making the overall approval, but they approve a policy or a code or any sort of rule, and then they trust their administrative management to ensure that it's implemented according to the rules. So it isn't a separation, but it is. I don't know. We need a new word. Audrey's going to come up with one.
I'll just give you kind of like a short anecdotal story, hopefully short, from quite a few years ago. But I was giving employment advice to an employer, and they felt confident that they knew who was engaging in theft. So they knew money was going missing. They had a lot of reports from their employees that money was going missing. They had a pretty good idea who was doing it based upon scheduling and opportunity and all that kind of stuff. But they didn't actually have evidence. The client I had was very good at his job, so he was pretty confident he knew it was, but that wasn't evidence to prove anything. So put in some, you can put invisible ink on objects, including money, and try to catch the thief red-handed. So they went through this whole process, and it probably took weeks, and I don't know how much money and aggravation. So they went through this process, and they caught the thief, not the thief that they expected, you know. And they spoke to the person that they caught, and it was honestly a crime of opportunity, because they made it obvious. There was money visible. This guy saw the money and said, well, somebody's stupid enough to leave it open, I'm gonna walk off with it. So they caught the thief, but not the one that they wanted. And they knew this person was not the thief they were targeting. There was the real thief still out there, because this person didn't have the prior opportunities. And they had a dilemma now. They had caught a thief, so that's important, get them out of the workplace. But there was still another thief out there who they didn't have any evidence they hadn't caught. A couple anecdotes out of that is that, you know, I believe they were 100% confident they knew who the thief was, but they didn't have the evidence. They didn't act on it. They can't act on it. It was based upon rumor and innuendo and information that wouldn't have withstood the scrutiny of anybody. On the other hand, they were smart to implement a plan. Even the best laid plans don't work out. And how I draw this connection to where the role of chief and counsel and management and so forth and so on, the management are the ones that gather the information. The management are the ones that actually have to make the decisions and implement the decisions. Council, they're not there on a day-by-day basis. They don't have all of the information. It's pretty rare that chief and counsel will have all of the information. So that's the equivalent of my client saying, I know who the thief is, and they're not going to take action on it, but you're going to get the information. You know, plant the dyed money to try and catch the thief. But you only act on the evidence you have, not what you think, not the rumors, not what somebody's whispering in your ear or anything else like that. That might mean that you have to go out and gather the information. And again, that's management's responsibility to gather the information and ultimately implement the decision on the information that's available. You know, so the kind of some of my anecdote is that, yeah, chief and counsel might raise issues, they might raise questions and stuff like that, but they're not the ones who are actually in the position to gather the information to actually implement the decision, if there in fact there is a decision. That's why you have all those people, whether or not it's finance people, whether or not it's HR managers, whether or not it's public works, whatever the circumstances are, that's why you have all those people. Let them do their jobs, in my view.
Thank you very much. You've just set yourself up for the next question. I reshuffled my deck a little bit here, and there are tough questions in here, and this is one of our tough questions. And just to paraphrase on what's going on with this question is about, we have a chief and counsel, we have one member of chief and counsel who believes there's corruption, financial corruption with other members, certain members of chief and counsel. That counselor who's concerned doesn't have any information to justify it, not getting financial reports, and is asking what is the process to get a forensic audit done. What I can share is I've never seen an actual forensic audit in my career. Maybe I did, but what that one was a new chief and counsel investigating the prior chief. So it wasn't like an active counsel. And just so you know, what a forensic audit is when, and I know I'm supposed to put my phone in a basket before I come up here, right? But I was actually looking up just so I'm clear on what the definition is. But it is specifically auditing firms all across Canada, probably the world, have departments that do this specifically. And they go in there and their role is to specifically detect fraud, embezzlement, things like that. It also talks about cyber crimes that are becoming an issue now. And that information, my understanding, can be used in court to go after a party who's found to be, in fact, committing criminal activities. But I think the specific question that I can't answer is, like, how would somebody, an individual counselor of an active chief and counsel, be able to proceed on that path?
I'll start off, first comment, I guess, is watch the language you're using, because if you start saying, fraud or embezzlement, I can't remember what the first word that you would use, but what was the word in the question you had asked?
The actual word in the question is corrupt.
Yeah, so you start using those kinds of words, you're already polarizing everybody. You're already starting to put yourself in a bit of a hole, Because if you start saying there's financial corruption or fraud, people are going to get their backs up and they're going to get incredibly defensive on that. You know, try to think of different language. It could be just very simply financial irregularities, something that's a little bit more softer, something that's not so divisive, and something that's not going to force people into a defensive position, you know. And if you can, avoid pointing fingers at anybody. Like if there's a concern that there's financial irregularities with the community, then that's what it is. It's financial irregularities with the community. Don't suggest somebody's at fault. Don't suggest somebody's embezzling. Don't suggest somebody's stealing money. Because if ultimately you need your colleagues on council to assist you to move that forward, don't start alienating everybody. Because if you're one person out of a 5 or 10 member council, as we said earlier on, not only myself but others, one person doesn't really have any authority. So ultimately you're going to need the alliances of presumably a majority of the community. Don't start alienating by making those kinds of allegations and start pointing fingers. Try to keep it, as I say, soft, non-accusational, and don't point fingers, because you're not going to accomplish anything at that point in time. Plus, the other point is if you start using harsh language like fraud, that is actually very difficult to prove, if not impossible. If financial irregularities might be occurring, that doesn't mean it's fraudulent. Doesn't mean somebody stole money. Doesn't mean that there's embezzlement. Just means that there's some financial irregularities. And if that's the real goal, then that's what you want to promote is, you know, a forensic audit to identify financial irregularities. My view, you're more likely to accomplish something like that than saying, oh, I want to get a forensic audit to prove that Mr. Smith stole $100,000 last year. Good luck with that. I don't think you're going to even get out of the starting gates on something if you make something that accusatory and force people into a defensive position. From a practical point of view, to follow up what I just said, like practical point of view is you have to get a majority of council on side to do something like that. You know, the forensic auditor wants to get paid. Who's going to authorize the payment? Who's got the authority to spend tens of thousands of dollars? Probably council. They have to get access to documents. An outsider, accountant or otherwise, they don't have a right to access any of the documents. So you're going to have to get council to approve it, or you're going to have to get financial administration on side. So how are you going to get access to the documents? You know, so again, if you can do that through a band council resolution, that's the best and easiest way to go about doing that. Ultimately, if you can't get band council resolution on side, would you start involving the police? Again, that's going to be extremely adversarial if you get the police involved. But are the police going to show any interest in a commercial, or not a commercial, in a financial issue at a First Nation? Probably not. They're so busy with violent crime, they're not going to be all that terribly interested in some kind of financial crime unless it gets, you know, into their attention or into their wheelhouse. And so those are the two suggestions I would make, at least initially.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments on that? Just as I'm go ahead.
I think we actually did that. No. But that's what we were instructed was as long as the chief and council were, or a majority of the chief and council were in favor, and it was a couple of band members who were insisting on this, they had to have an individual. So the individual has to put their name forward to say, I'm requesting it, and then they had to have chief and council support it in order for it to go, otherwise nobody was going to touch it. And it was just, I don't even think there was any rule saying they wouldn't. I think it was just an auditing firm or professional organization would not want to put their name in jeopardy by taking on something that was not endorsed, because it, you know, might end up backfiring on their integrity.
Okay, the other piece I want to add is I believe that I heard the number to do a forensic audit was $300,000 at one point for one community. So there's a significant cost to it. But at the same time too, I'm trying to also think the other side too. What are potential solutions? I know and I'm sort of reflecting on the question a bit too. We are in a place because of COVID where ISK, for example, has relaxed audit requirement rules, where we do have communities that are several years behind in their audits. That would be like one of the normal places that we would catch like high level, at least irregularities. In my own sense, as part of meetings with auditors when they're doing their annual audit, is myself personally, and council can do that too, is just ask them to pay particular attention to a certain area to make sure all the checks and balances were in place. Like that. I'm just trying to think of potential solutions rather than going through the process of a full-blown forensic audit. Not saying don't do it. I just know that there's a lot involved to it as well. So I don't know. That's something that I can think about anyway. What ways can the concerns be addressed without going that route? There's got to be other avenues. Okay.
That's another conference there, Don.
Pardon me?
That's another conference.
That's a whole other conference. It'll be really exciting. It'll be entitled Forensic Accounting. Everybody will get really excited about it. Okay, I'm gonna go to a question here because before my phone shuts itself down or goes black again. There's one question here that, and this is a little bit off the track of what we were talking about, but it's how can you support all First Nations to get off the boil water advisories? And I do want to, and I'm glad Iska's in the room. I'm in the room. Shoal Lake 40 had the second longest boil water advisory in Canada. I believe it was 23 or 24 years. We just got off it 2 years ago. A lot of work, a lot of negotiations. I was going to say it is tough. Okay, I'll have to say it. As tough as it was, we did actually approach it very much as a partnership model with ISK, with government. We actually ran a pilot project, Shoal Lake 40, where it was Indigenous companies only could bid on it, or Aboriginal companies. We won the bid. We joint ventured it. It came in under budget, on time, during the COVID pandemic. And we actually won a provincial award for it in the small municipality categories for the build. So I'm hoping that story gives hope to other First Nations that are still struggling with their boil water advisory, and why my website is open, my phone is open. Part of the water class action water settlement that occurred a couple of years ago, the actual settlement, it does include a commitment from ISK, Indigenous Service, or Canada in general, to fund the infrastructure, the operation and maintenance to address, because I get it. I've been around long enough. I do see how something like a boil water advisory or unclean water, dangerous water can impact people, can impact families, can impact kids, health, everything. So I view it as very, very important that we address them. I know, and again, too, I haven't been involved with ISK directly, but at one point in time I was sitting on a regional body with ISK where they were slowly getting the major builds done, things like that. I'm assuming there has been progress made. Maybe not fast enough, but it's for individual communities. I would just say, just be very assertive, be very don't take no for an answer. Even internally, when we built ours, we made sure we're having project management meetings every 2 weeks. The engineers didn't like it. ISK sometimes didn't like it, but we had everybody there every meeting, and we're holding everybody accountable to timelines, to budgets, everything. So I don't know if anybody else has experience with boil water advisories and the related infrastructure, but feel free to share. That's been the Shoal Lake experience. So
I think it just points to the roles. So the chief and council, it's so important for them to be out there politically advocating for water. So it I guess identifies that's the importance of their role. So you of course would have and use your technicians for their expertise to arm you with enough information to go out into the public and fight those battles. So those very much are political battles that need to get fought. So I could have one of my staff go up and say, I'm the manager of this, but it doesn't hold as much water as if my chief went up and said, I'm the chief of the community and this is my concerns. And that's where the whole role of them being the political advocates, that's why it's so important.
Definitely, and it truly was a team effort in Shoal Lake's case, and the leadership, of course, were the front end of the advocacy effort on behalf of the community. The other side of it too was at the staff level, which I'm part of. the engineers we had on file, keeping in mind that these projects are pretty complex. You know, we're dealing with Hydra, we're dealing with Bell Canada, we're dealing with all types of different sub-trades, and keeping everybody on task and keeping it as a priority. That's more or less the way I viewed my role. In a way, of course, in finance is my background, but I was also, I'll be honest, you're cracking the whip with the professionals. You know, we've got expectations, we have needs, get this done. That was kind of the approach to it. Okay, this is sort of for, I'm thinking, Brad, Priscilla, and probably myself. Okay, if a chief and council member asks a vendor, so I'm presuming, let's say a contractor or what have you, to complete work and doesn't follow financial procedures, the finance policy, who is ultimately responsible? Is it the finance managers?
So, so the first point is that I think a take out of that is if chiefs engage somebody to provide a service, you know, or a product to the community, there's a contract there. That contract is still binding on the community. You know, from the third party's point of view, if they've contracted to provide a service or a product, they don't have any reason to go beyond and expressly look for the authority of the chief in a given set of circumstances. Or even if it's a council member, if it's a council member who's got a portfolio, you know, if the third party has no reason to doubt their authority to bind the community, then the community is bound by that contract. So there's, you know, so if there's a liability, the community has to honor that contract. They got the services or they got the product, whatever the circumstances are, they're bound by that contract. Now, if there is a failure to follow proper financial procedure, if it's done by an employee, that's a performance issue. You know, whether or not it's a misconduct and it justifies discipline, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, not to understate it, but it's very simply a performance issue addressed with the employee. If it's by a council member or the chief who have engaged a third party into a contract or something like that, again, you get back to the whole point is that, are they in breach of their fiduciary duties? Like, what have they done that in fact is not in the best interest of the community? You know, so one of the cases I had put up there was, you know, chief had directed $149,000 to be directed to pay to a third party. There didn't appear to be any benefit to the community whatsoever. The money just went missing. Ultimately, the chief was held personally liable for that $149,000. And the fact that the community got a product or a service wasn't an important factor there. Is that the chief directed payment without the authority to direct that payment. And the fact that the chief didn't benefit didn't reduce their liability. There was a breach of their fiduciary duty. There was a loss of $149,000. The chief was held liable for that. So the risk is for a council member or a chief who engage a third party on a contract without following proper financial procedures, there's a risk to them personally that they could be held personally liable for that money. Simple as that.
I'd like to make a comment as well. So something for your First Nation. Again, this partially goes to separation of politics from administration. Whose responsibility is it to procure? So is there a request for proposals or tendering? What's your internal processes? How does that happen? Is there a threshold? So anything, often it's like $30,000 or over, you require 3 quotes, but is there, what are they quoting on? So some of those things are really important. I'll just share really quickly this one story. I was working with a community, this is some years ago, and just helping on some of their budgeting, figuring out where their shortfalls were. They were on the verge of going into third party, and this bill came in one day for $100,000. And that's a lot of money for one bill, and it was from a consulting firm, technical type services. So I did it very matter of fact. Okay, where's the purchase order for this, or where's the contract for this? And just kind of went through that line and got to the end. There was no BCR, no signed contract, and this particular funding was reliant on a 50-50. So every dollar that the First Nation put in, the funder would have compensated it by $1. But at the end of the day, the First Nation did not have to pay that bill because there was no chain in terms of confirming that there was ever a contract to begin with. So if you don't have procedures, and this sounds simple, you know, how are things being approved? Things like this, and that could have potentially been a $100,000 check going out because if it would have made its way right to accounts payable or into finance, they would have just processed it, right? So those things are very important.
Ditto on that. But no, seriously though, financial policy for sure, but you know, a procurement policy is really important as well. And again, you know, as our communities evolve and get more engaged in business, and you know, these policies are so important to protect the assets of the First Nation.
I think we, so from the perspective of administration, if the chief walks into the finance clerk's office and says, I need to check for this, I'm going to this meeting right now. More often than not, the finance clerk is not even gonna ask any questions, because they're now looking at the senior most person in the First Nation, because that's always been the perception. So when I do meet with my chief and council initially, I do try to make clear to them that they are not to go into the staff's offices and direct them, because you're putting the staff in a position where they don't want to say no to the leadership, but if they don't, then they're not following the rules that they've been hired under this policy. There's a strict set of rules. You don't pay without this. You don't, you know, you need the approvals, you need this, you need that, you need all the paper trail. But it is very intimidating for a junior level staff person who actually writes the checks when the chief walks into their office, or a council member for that matter, walks into their office and says, I need this. For a lot of our staff members, they don't have the courage to stand up and say, no, I can't do that. So they end up putting themselves in a position where they're gonna now be disciplined because they've broken the policy, where the chief and council should have known better than to do it. So I do have that conversation with every chief and council that comes in. Tell you right now, not one of them likes it, because like we said earlier, most people come into chief and council, they don't exactly have the understanding. I too am working on the so you want to be on council thing, because every council member or person who's come in had no clue what the process was behind a decision making, and they assumed that they were on chief and council now, that they could make the rules and do whatever. So they really didn't understand it, and it's a rude awakening when you think, because yes, chief and council are the highest authority, but if you've got some good governance tools in place and policies, then it's a protection piece. But everybody's got to respect those tools. So if you can have all the policies in the world, but if you're not going to follow them, it makes no difference. So you have to make sure that in our communities, that our leadership, our management, all of our staff, and our community members are aware that there's a reason that we have these policies. They're a protection, because you never know. We don't know who we're getting for a chief and council. We have no idea what their skills are, what their experience is. So we need to be upfront and lay out, you know, here's the chain of command, here's the governance structure, and then we hope for the best. We hope they're going to respect it.
I'm just going to add another comment here to add in what all three had said here. So, you know, Michelle's talking about having a procurement policy, you know, having your admin, you know, accept or reject, you know, a request for payment, or somebody identifying the accounts payable or the check. All of that fits together, because if you have a procurement policy, then you know, and a finance officer says, well, this is not consistent with the procurement policy, they then have the courage to potentially say no when they should be saying no. You know, they're going to scrutinize that request, that purchase order, or that request for that check. And then when it comes time to somebody authorizing it, whether or not they're authorizing the purchase order or actually signing the check, somebody has to look at that check and say, oh, geez, that's $100,000. That's highly unusual. I've been here for 12 months, and the highest check I saw was $9,000. All of that fits together. You need all of those elements, you know, so that even if you have just very simple, an accounts payable clerk, somebody who's fairly low on the authority ladder, and they've got the chief standing in their office saying, give me this check right now, that accounts payable clerk should have the courage to say, well, that's not consistent with our purchase order policy. That's not consistent with our procurement policy. The paperwork's not here. I'm sorry, Mr. Chief, I can't authorize this, because if I authorize it, it's going to jeopardize my job, or it's going to get caught by somebody else. So all of those are important pieces to have in place, because it shouldn't really come down to one person catching some kind of financial irregularity. It should actually be seen probably by 2 or 3 different pairs of eyes before it actually goes out the door or into the mailbox or something like that. That's having the right checks and balances in place so that it doesn't come down to one person. Like one of the things I learned when I started practicing law, why do you have 2 people signing on a check? If you've got one fraudulent person, that person needs to convince a second person to sign that check. Simple rule why you have that double signing authority. And it makes absolute financial sense to have something like that. But again, you have to have the right people in the right place.
Okay, thank you. And just as you were speaking as well, too, just from my own experience, as the Director of Finance, again, where I work is not a perfect place, no place is. If there is anything that, I don't want to call it irregular or something, that it will be flagged by our finance staff and brought to me. And from there, either I will resolve it with them. If I can't, if it's something that I feel should be brought to Chief and Council attention, they will. So if it's, I don't know if it's self-policing is the right way of putting it. It's communicating to Chief and Council, listen, this transaction could be a significant transaction. There weren't 3 quotes for it. There wasn't a budget in place for it, things like that. That's my responsibility to communicate it. So I guess when asking the question, am I ultimately responsible for the actual transaction? I would like to say no, but am I responsible for addressing it and communicating it? Yes, I am. That's kind of the way I look at it. Okay, I'll go to, I'm guessing I know this question. I think Brad could probably answer it in one word. Can a BCR be rescinded by only one councillor? No. That's kind of what I figured. It would have to be a quorum.
And that's consistent with the idea that I'm sure I've seen myself. I've had clients come to me and says, well, we'll just circulate the BCR and get everybody else to sign it. That's in the same vein. Just signing a BCR doesn't mean it's a valid BCR. There's got to be that duly convened meeting behind that BCR. So having one person sign it, or circling it by email and signing it, or fax machine and signing it, or go have a coffee at Tim Hortons and signing a BCR, it doesn't make it a valid resolution one way or the other. More than one word, of course, because I'm a lawyer.
Yeah. Good.
And you speak by the word.
Yeah. Good point. Now I'm just thinking through the pandemic. You don't know how many times I just use electronic signatures, and so no, and they weren't like duly convened meetings. But that's I'll take it down myself as duly noted. I will strive not to do that anymore. There is actually a related question here, and it is getting more and more common. Decisions made by email. What are the rules, and should this be incorporated into First Nation policies?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Oh, sure. Decisions that are made by email. What are the rules? And what I'm thinking on that one is my exact situation. I need a decision. I'm the Director of Finance. I'll send an email blast out to our 5 Chief and Council. I need quorum. Can I get responses from 3 individuals? And I get, yes, I agree. Go for it, Don. And then I'm done. But I've heard what you just said. That wasn't a duly convened meeting. But I guess the question is, should there be rules or something incorporated into the policies to address that?
So I would answer that there's a couple different ways. So sometimes management or administration, they actually have the authority to make a decision or to implement a decision. And what they're really looking for is direction from the council, or they want assurance that council is on side with them making a decision. So you're not really needing a BCR or a decision from council. You're just looking for direction from council, so that if that decision is made and then it's challenged by council or challenged by the community, that management person or that administration person knows that council is going to back them up on that. They're going to support them on that. So again, the real decision might be with management and they're just looking for direction from council. That's perfectly fine. You can get on the telephone, email, text messages, whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with that, because you're just getting direction or support from council and chief. On the other hand, if you're actually looking for an actual decision, my view is that you can't do it by way of telephone or by way of email, again, unless it's actually authorized somewhere in your meeting documents. You know, there is, you know, duly convened meeting. There's always the general rules about how you have a duly convened meeting, and there's also exceptions. So what's the exceptions? You know, so it used to be historically that every meeting, whether or not it was a council meeting or even a board of directors on a corporation, every meeting had to be in person unless it was authorized to be done by way of telephone or by video. So telephone and video gets a lot more common now, so that it's still a properly duly convened meeting if in fact it's authorized by the governance documents, for example. Do the governance documents authorize a decision being made without a meeting by way of email? I'd be highly doubtful of that. From my point of view as a lawyer, I would say that's a decision that's open to be set aside if somebody were to challenge it. That's the weakness of that kind of decision-making process.
Thank you very much for the legal advice. I'm going to change my emails. I'm not going to ask for approval anymore. I'm saying, as per policy, I'm making this decision. I'm just ensuring that there's support for it, that kind of thing. I'll use that kind of language instead, but that's...
Exactly, that's...
Okay, thanks. What am I looking for? We got like, I think we have 4 more questions. Let's do a tough one. Okay, okay, basically what this question is asking is if there is a chief and council meeting, one of the members of chief and council has been identified as being in conflict, but they don't leave. They just stay there, and they still can. They just insist they're going to participate in this vote.
This is actually why I raised that one question with you earlier. That this is something I hear often. I'm here to represent the interests of the people, and so I need to be here to properly convey. But there's clearly a conflict, and short of how do you grab someone by the neck and say, you got to go out. Because that's actually where it kind of gets to that point, if a person is not wanting to leave. So I've seen it happen where the council at the time will just defer that decision and not discuss it any further until the person will actually excuse themselves. So it doesn't get addressed anyway. That's...
I certainly find this a challenging issue. Even you know, earlier when we were discussing conflict of interest, there is an apparent necessity for people to self-police. It is on them to be open and honest about whether or not they're in conflict. And I've had occasion to question whether or not somebody was in conflict, and have, you know, a resulting no, I'm not in conflict. And I've also had occasion to experience where, you know, there's participation in the conversation leading up to the decision, and then leaving the situation. But in my opinion, by that time, you've already tainted the decision that is before the people who are not in conflict. So, you know, to me, it can be a mucky situation if the person who is believed to be in conflict refuses to identify or, you know, acknowledge they are in conflict and continues to participate, then, you know, I would think that should be on the record, on your meeting record, I feel that invites harm to your council and your decision making. So, you know, I guess I can't wait to hear what Brad has to say. Because I would second that question. But it's challenging, and it's particularly challenging in our communities because, let's face it, you know, if we're not related to the person, we've likely known that person our whole life, and we could, you know, likely care for that person, and maybe we don't care for that person, but we have a connection to this person. It's not like you're the mayor and you're going home at 4 o'clock and you never see the people again. So anyways.
I think, I know with my council, they've asked me that question multiple times too. And I've always advised them that if you think, if the thought crosses your mind that you might be, or someone else might be in conflict, then declare it so that it's out there in the open, have the conversation, and hopefully you can respectfully decide as a group whether or not you should continue or get more advice. But yeah, if you think, a lot of people don't want to be confrontational, so they won't bring it up, but then after they'll walk away thinking, I should have said something, or the decision that's made gets out in the public and they find out, because members find out everything. There are no secrets in a First Nation. So they're gonna find out who sat at the table and took part in the discussion, and it's gonna become an issue in the community, and so you're better off to declare the conflict, or my council's asked me, what if you know that someone's in a conflict and they won't declare it? Then I always tell them, bring it to the table, and put it out there to say that I do believe there's conflict and this is why. So you don't need to go into the discussion of what's being decided, but you do need to discuss whether there's a conflict or not. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up, because either decision, yes or no, someone's going to complain, and you need to at least show that you've tried to honestly handle it, and not, because absolutely you could defer it, but at the end of the day, how many times are you going to defer that decision? And so you need to get it out there and discuss it and come up with a reasonable process to do that as a group.
So I think when you're talking about a conflict, so there's, first of all, the conflict I addressed this morning about being in a conflict of interest, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. And if a person makes a decision, participates in a decision when they're in a conflict, that raises their personal liability. That's the conflict in the context of a fiduciary duty. Most of us are also aware of a conflict of interest that's probably addressed in a personnel manual or a code of conduct. And I suspect most, if not all of that, doesn't talk about a conflict of interest. It talks about a potential conflict of interest. And it's worded in that way because, as Patricia says, people don't want to have that conflict. They don't want to have that adversary nature at a council meeting. So the thing is, that's why it's a lower threshold. It's a potential conflict of interest, because you're not going to hold a hearing, you're not going to gather evidence and decide conclusively that somebody's in an actual conflict of interest. That's too time-consuming, that's too divisive, that's too difficult, and if somebody disagrees, going to end up being expensive if lawyers get involved. So that's why it's a lower threshold of a potential conflict. And again, if you've got that policy, you probably have a policy that defines what would be a conflict. And council members have loyalties to different issues. Some people care about housing and they don't care about public work. Some people care about the children, but they're not too concerned about employment-related issues. So that doesn't put them in a conflict. The fact that they have a different priority, on different issues, that's not a conflict. Not unless you've defined that as being a conflict. And if somebody, as Chief Michelle was saying, everybody knows everybody in the community. So somebody went to school with somebody 40 years ago, and there's, they feel an element of loyalty to them. That, by most definitions of a conflict of interest, especially in a community like what you have, that's not a conflict of interest. Should they excuse themselves from a decision? Maybe. That's where Chief Michelle says that maybe they should self-police and remove themselves from that to avoid the appearance of impropriety. But it's not necessarily a conflict of interest. But again, if that person isn't going to declare their conflict of interest, individually, It's still up to the rest of the council to make a decision whether or not there's a conflict of interest. Because if there's a decision on the table and somebody refuses to declare a conflict or refuses to remove them from themselves from the meeting, that should be noted in the record, you know? And then the rest of the council members should actually make a determination whether or not there's a conflict, because that'll be the reason why they've deferred that decision. And if there's a financial loss to the community because they deferred that decision, guess who's personally liable? That person who refused to declare a conflict of interest. You know, so they didn't do the declaration, they didn't remove themselves from the community, and there's a potential financial loss. That person is now going to potentially be responsible for that. You know, and if the rest of the council does their job by saying there is a conflict here, this person won't leave, therefore we're not going to make the decision, but there's going to be a financial liability. All of that should go on a record. All of that should go into the minutes. You know, I think Don touched upon this in his introduction, where he said, you know, there's an agenda. First agenda item is a conflict of interest. That's really wise, because if it's always on the agenda and everybody has to say no conflict, that tells everybody how important that is, and it also means it's top of mind, which also means for the person who has to declare a conflict, it's not going to feel that unusual. It's not going to feel like they're getting singled out. You know, or if they didn't think of it, because some people honestly won't think of it. They say, oh, no conflict. And then one of their colleagues say, well, Brad, you know, don't you have a business interest with so-and-so? Oh, geez, you're right, yeah. Aren't you in a conflict? Yeah, I think you're right. I'll have to excuse myself. So there's nothing that has to be adversarial about that, you know. But if it's on that agenda and you deal with it every single meeting, it becomes actually routine. And you'll probably be surprised at how often there actually are conflicts. So somebody excuse themselves. So the fact that somebody has to excuse themselves for a debate and a discussion and a decision may become part of the routine. There's not going to be any kind of a stigma attached to it, because sometimes people, if somebody has to be told, you have to leave this meeting, they're going to take some offense to that. They're going to get adversarial on that. But if it's actually part of the routine and it's always on that agenda and always people are always talking about it, you know, including you can sit there and say, well, you know, I have this friendship or I have this relationship with so-and-so. I'm not too sure if there's a conflict. What does everybody else say? And everybody says, no, that's not a conflict. Then you all learn through that discussion and that debate. You know, you have a better idea of what the parameters are of a conflict, so that people aren't trying to avoid declaring a conflict, or you don't have other people trying to create a conflict, you know, saying you're in a conflict and so forth and so on. So at the end of the day, I think have it on that agenda, like Don suggested, is probably brilliant, you know, and it's great for, you know, part of the governance part, because anybody who sees your agenda says, number one item, tells you how important that is. That's an important item to that council meeting. But again, at the end of the day, if the conflict exists, and if they go ahead and make that decision, the risk is that decision could be set aside if it's challenged by somebody, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And just so you're aware that what I referenced there about declaration of conflicts at the beginning, in practice, it does work. And what I mean is, you know, and it hasn't been myself, but there have been my fellow board members, where they look at the agenda and say, you know what, number 7, I'm in conflict there because my First Nation is involved in whatever, maybe negotiations with, let's say, the Hydro Board. They will excuse themselves just for that one agenda item. The more common things I deal with at the First Nation level is family relations. And it's not funny, it's kind of cute, actually. My 2 kids are actually Show Lake 40 members, so they access post-secondary dollars from there. So I'm always like, don't talk to me about my kids. I can't talk to you about them. I'm the director of finance. I can't be involved in any decisions related to that. And the nice thing is, when working with council, they follow that as well too, in terms of if there's a direct benefit to, let's say, one of their children or their spouse or something like that. They're pretty good at basically saying, you know what, I'm just not going to take part in this decision. So we have a few more questions. I'm thinking this one is a quick answer, Brad. I'm thinking legal. Is it legal or fair for a group of members to bring and possibly persuade a number of members in the community to vote and pass motions at a band meeting? I'm most thinking the easy answer is yes, but and where I'm going with yes, I see that all the time at AFN when they're electing a national chief, where they're block voting. But I'll ask you to respond.
So I guess a couple comments on that. And I think whether or not it's a council meeting or a band meeting, I think, whether or not it's by committee or whether it's by lobbying, there's no doubt issues are debated and discussed outside of the regular meeting. That by itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But what's important is that the persons who are actually making the decision, they're still open-minded until it comes to the time to actually make the decision. So if community members or certain council members are lobbying each other, and a council member says, that's a really good idea, Brad. You've got my vote. I'm going to vote in favor of it. And then they go to a council meeting a week or a month later and say, here, I'm voting in favor of it. Well, I would argue that's inappropriate because that person didn't go to the council meeting and make a decision at the council meeting. They made their decision behind closed doors at a private meeting or as a result of lobbying or something like that. You're supposed to keep, if you're a decision maker, you're supposed to keep an open mind until you get to that meeting. The other part, as I mentioned earlier on, disclosure. So things, if council member gets lobbied, they get information outside of the council meeting, they actually have an obligation to share that with the rest of the council members at that, either in advance or at the council meeting itself. So the concept itself of debating or even lobbying on issues outside of a meeting, that by itself isn't necessarily inappropriate, and sometimes that can be healthy. It could be a good way of vetting an issue and making sure all of the relevant information is brought to the light of day. But the decision makers have to make the decision at that meeting, not at a private meeting, not as a result of some promise made outside of the meeting. If something like that happens, and I think we can all appreciate from a governance point of view or just simple democratic principles, having somebody behind closed doors get lobbied and make a commitment to vote a certain way, we all recognize that's not good governance, and that's not democratic. That's why they have to keep that open mind and actually make the decision when they're at that meeting, whether it's a council meeting or a band meeting. So again, do the typical lawyer thing. It's a yes or no, or maybe so. It kind of depends on the circumstances. But as a general rule, there's nothing against that. But keep an open mind and make the decision at the meeting that you're supposed to make the decision at.
I just want to make a comment on the community meetings. So even with community meetings, like a good practice is what would be your community's definition of a duly called meeting? First of all, what's the notice period? How are people being informed? So building on what Brad was saying this morning as well, how are you informing people? Do they have option to participate virtually? But also setting that agenda. So the purpose of the meeting is clear, and having a really strong chair for that meeting to keep people focused on those agenda items so that other business doesn't creep in, right? I mean, it's not to say that you want to exclude the concerns or that area of importance, but making sure that, so one community I'm aware of, they've introduced a couple of things. For a community meeting, there's a complaints process, so you have to register your complaint. You have to put it in writing. So it's not just going to be, again, the keyboard warriors, right? We're not just going to go and do that on Facebook. We're going to put it in writing, but the other part is that how you have to put notice in that you want something to be included on either a council agenda or you want it included on a community meeting agenda. So it just puts more process, gives people notice, and then the agenda item, the agenda is clear in terms of that duly convened meeting. So it's just a good practice. So it's not just a free-for-all, and we're all going to come together and just share our negative thoughts and concerns.
We actually stopped voting at community meetings because we saw a number of things happening. We saw some of our elders being bullied as to what to vote, and it was right out in the open. There was no secret. I sat at a table myself and watched my mother and my aunt vote yes to something and then vote no right after to the same thing. There was basically our community, we have about 450, almost 500 voting members. And at a community meeting, if we get 80 people, that's not even a quarter of our electorate. It was our members themselves who said they didn't think it was right that the 80 people that could make it to that meeting were voting on behalf of everyone else and making all the decisions. We did get the pushback from some who said, well, those are the 80 people that come to every band meeting and they're the ones who are concerned. but it's not necessarily a matter of the people who can't attend. It's not necessarily that they're not concerned. Maybe they can't get there or things like that. So we do all of our community voting now. We have a community decision process. We created a policy code around it. It's actually all secret ballot, and so we do it that way for our major community decisions. And everyone, we send everyone a ballot. Whether or not you want to take part is up to you, but we afford every member the opportunity to vote on those items. Might take a little bit longer, but it's the fairest way that we've found. And I think we've done, I don't know, 5, 6 now, full-on community votes. And every vote, we're getting a higher voter turnout. So people are really, they're comfortable with the process.
Okay, thank you. Those are all great answers. Just 2 more questions left. I already asked this question to Audrey, so I'll ask her to respond to it. To everyone is, what if we have members, and it says of council, but that could be any delegate, that shows up at training conferences and just leaves? Most times they just, they're paid ahead of time and just show up and take off, so. I already know what Audrey's answer is.
Don't do it. Attend. So there's a couple of things with this. I can share with you, back about 5 years ago, Noki, when we were coordinating what was referred to as ISC information sessions. So we would coordinate, select the venue, organize the speakers, get the AV stuff in place, but also handle all the travel claims. So as a result of that, what was happening, so here I am on part of the community, I register for the information session, I show up, but however, receive a travel advance to go to the session. I travel to Toronto, Sudbury, or wherever, and then I leave, go attend or not, and then go back home. We were not receiving those travel claims and reimbursing. So as a result of that, we've changed now. We will pay directly the communities because number one, you're going to know that your person actually attended, right? So we work that out with finance. Hey, finance, you want reimbursement? Send us the claims and we'll reimburse. If they send us the claims, then we can just say, sorry, they did not attend, right? Because we know we have registration. So some of those things, but the other thing on the governance side or the finance side or both is the double dipping side, right? If we've gone to the point of reimbursing the First Nation because it also saves the person from having that, I'm not going to use the word opportunity, but because some people, some counselors are submitting, they're attending a lot of meetings, they're doing a lot of travel, managing how their travel is reimbursed. You don't want to put them in a situation where they're double dipping, being paid twice. And reimbursing the First Nation because often those are advanced. So it's up to your community as well in terms of how are people accountable for traveling. Some communities pay a lot of money for their council and chiefs to travel to attend meetings. So do they present a report? I know some communities that I know that within our Nokiwan member communities, they do report on their travel. What was the meeting about? Is there any information to be shared? Any decisions coming at various political tables and so on. But that's really a community decision. But as an organization, those are some of the things that we've done to help to support that accountability piece.
Okay, we'll move on to the final question now. That's good. And this is, this is the one that came in just at the last second, and I think it's a great question because it really does lead towards what are the next steps. The question is, aside from ISK, where else are there governance dollars funding? I love the question because it shows the importance of this work that needs to be done. It also recognizes that there's a cost to doing it. Just my own personal experience before I turn it over to the panel. I do know, and again, too, it's more program-oriented, but I know there's systems planning dollars at Ministry of Community and Social Services, so that's one area you can look at. I know that they hate being called MIA, Indigenous Affairs. Ministry of Indigenous Affairs, Ontario, they have dollars for, and they're usually every year an intake for ECDEV planning, strategic work, things like that. The other thing that we look at Shoal Lake, where we're not shy about looking right into the programs themselves, like let's say it's Jordan's Principle, education, allocate some dollars from there towards whatever's needed, like policy development, specific policy development, for example, to Jordan's Principle programming. The other piece, and I hope none of the First Nations, I've actually heard recently a very bad example of a bank taking advantage of a community. Right now, like I'm regularly buying GICs at 5%. Can't give you an exact number because I don't know. It's in the several hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've made in terms of interest, so it's own source revenue. So we can use that. I did hear a bad story about a First Nation who had in excess of 10 million in their account. Their bank did not notify them, 0 interest for a year and a half. So please, finance staff, check to see what you have sitting in there. All GICs that we buy are all flexible, redeemable. So if it turns out, if I put, and I've done that, we've got a project, let's say it's $5 million, an infrastructure project, we know it's not going to start for 3 months, I'll buy an annual GIC at 5%. And if and when I need to redeem it, I will. So, but the benefits were several hundreds of thousands of dollars for the community I work for. The other piece I also want to mention too, the First Nations. I'd mentioned this to ISK yesterday. We just got notification that all the resources that we didn't spend during COVID, and for Shoal Lake it was mostly in the education area because we have an on-reserve school, right? We received funding, however, the school wasn't open for the most part. If not, it was just the O&M, the insurance, skeleton crew. So we have significant dollars that ISK is saying, okay, now we're gonna, the day has come, and I saw this day coming. What are you gonna do with those resources? So basically what they're asking for is a plan, a 2-year plan. How are you gonna spend these resources that you didn't spend during COVID? I'm thinking that a large part of, or not a large part, a portion of those funds could go towards strengthening our governance. So are just some ideas that I have. I'm going to ask the panel, do you have any other leads or sources that you can think of for when it comes to governance dollars?
Well, in the back of the room, we have GovernWise.
There you go.
So, something though, this is maybe the reality of stuff, is that sometimes we don't see value unless we have to pay for it. Or we don't recognize the expertise unless we're paying a really top dollar for it. So we are happy to receive your donations for the work we do. Because we're always looking, so one of the things with that though, having someone help you to facilitate, like there's some awesome governance handbook. This is a great document. It's an easy read. For those of us that like that kind of stuff. But also there's some really cool tools. This has been around for a long time, the Governance Capacity Planning Tool. You can pick and choose areas that you want to focus on. You can't do everything, so don't have 20 priorities. Manage those expectations as well, right? Because it takes time to work through. Financially, there are, like I said, Ron has some dedicated funds that can help to support governance development. But again, I think it's the maximum is $75,000 in a year for a project or an initiative. So pick your priorities, build on that governance foundation. Training, there is training available. I know we at Nokiwan, we do training. GovernWise is doing training. We're actually modernizing our governance training now for chiefs and councils. We have lots of sample. There's FMB does some training. They have, if you go on the FMB website, there's all kinds of sample policies and tools and resources. So there is stuff out there. So just focus on a priority. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money to get this work done. And I think that's really a key. I also see where more communities now are investing in a governance person within the community to help to facilitate the coordination, pulling meetings together, working through documents, updating them, and bringing them to the point of conclusion, so the approval and then the rollout and so on. But anyone wants to chat with me, I'm happy to chat about that. Like I said, Ron is there as well. I think he had to leave to catch his flight, but he is available. And the thing with Ron, he's got the money and he's very eager to get it rolled out. So the sooner you put your request in, the sooner it will be approved. And it will happen fairly quickly as well.
There's also private foundations, so Trillium Foundation, they're not necessarily private, but you can access dollars through them. Internally, though, governance is effective management and administration of everything. So you literally could charge yourself administration fees for managing the dollars that come down from your funders and use a portion of your administration fees to cover governance work. Just a creative way of doing it, but I mean, it's legit. You cannot function without having a solid governance structure, and administering those programs relies on the solid tools that are developed, so the policies and the codes. So you're not lying if you're reporting administrative dollars for governance costs.
Okay, is there any more comments on that question? That's our last question. One piece that I would add, I really do support what you said about charging admin to the programs. Again, too, I can't give you precise numbers, probably because it's confidential, but otherwise I don't have it off the top of my head. With Shoal Lake, like we know the band support dollars that are accessed through ISC are not sufficient. Well, I'll just try and give you rough numbers. Our band support allocation is probably in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. Our admin fees are probably in the $600,000 to $700,000 range. It's more than the band support funding, and we need that for staffing, for technology, for governance, for all that stuff. It's just any organized, and I look at, I'll just use Shoal Lake as a one sample. There's no way to govern an organization of that size for $300,000, and I'm sure that every community is in that same boat. So you have to identify other sources to do that, and of course make it a priority. Okay, so that's our final question. Are we taking more questions now, or are we wrapping up? I know it's been a long day. I'm hoping that the questions that just from the past 2 days, that your questions were answered, and the ones that came in writing, that sufficiently answered what was asked of us. I'd like to say miigwech for allowing me to facilitate this part of it, and I'd like to give a hand for our panelists. And not unlike Audrey, like I'm sure we're all very busy people, but we're not too busy to help out each other. And that's kind of the way I am. If you need more information on anything I talked about, I'm not looking for consulting contracts. That's not what I'm about. If you needed information, for example, on how we dealt with our water systems or the housing project we got going on, give us a call. The Shoal Lake is probably open to sharing that information as well. So, miigwech again.